Hello there YouTube, my name is Valerie, and it has been forever since I made a video. Between a 3-week cold that may or may not have been bronchitis, and Christmas and New Year's festivities, it's been a busy last couple months. So without further ado, today I have the first of 2 videos on the top 12 books I read in 2014. I tried to make it 5 or 10 books, but it just wasn't possible, so I decided to make 2 videos with 6 books each. The main reason I'm having to split it up like that is because 10 of the 12 books are ones I read before I started making booktube videos, and so I haven't spoken about them in a video yet. That means I have a lot to say about them, so let's jump right in. These are in order of when I read them. Now, most of these books I no longer have, or I got them at the library, so I don't have them to hold up, but hopefully you will see a picture of the book here as I talk about it. The first book I want to talk about is The Sweetness at the Bottom of the Pie by Alan Bradley. This is the first book I read when I first started getting back into reading earlier this year. It was my reward to myself while finishing up my thesis, and it was the perfect book to read to get back into reading again. It's a murder mystery set in a small English town in the 1950s, told from the point of view of a precocious 11-year-old girl named Flavia Deleuze, whose main hobby is chemistry. I loved the characters in this book, especially Flavia herself. She's imaginative and clever and mischievous, and definitely takes advantage of the fact that most adults seriously underestimate her. It really evoked mystery or small-town charm, or whatever the author was trying to convey at the time, without getting too bogged down in unnecessary details. It had been a while since I'd found a really solid murder mystery series that was unlike anything else I'd ever read, so I was really happy to find this one. If you enjoy murder mysteries, or even if you're not sure if you do or not, I would highly recommend this book. The next book I want to talk about is The Casual Vacancy by J.K. Rowling. It took me a while to get around to reading this book, partially because I had heard mixed reviews about it. I can only assume now that the people who gave it poor reviews were expecting Harry Potter, because if you go into this book expecting Harry Potter, you will be disappointed. On its own though, I think this is an excellent, albeit heartbreaking novel. The story follows the citizens in a small town in England and whether or not a certain area of town should be part of their town or part of the neighboring town. The area in question is public housing, and so certain people in the town make no secret of their distaste for the people who live there, who they dismiss as lazy drug addicts. At the very beginning of the story, literally in the first 5 pages, so this isn't really a spoiler, the main champion for keeping the public housing area dies from natural causes, leaving the decision up in the air as to whether or not they will keep that area as part of the town, and who will take his place on the town council. This book was a lot darker than I expected it to be. I knew going in that it wasn't going to be Harry Potter, but even so, there was still a moment a few chapters in where I went, okay, we are not at Hogwarts anymore. Be prepared. This book has bullying and drug abuse and domestic abuse and rape and some people in just seriously dire circumstances. It shows the dark side of humanity, what people are like behind closed doors, and even worse sometimes, what they're like in their own thoughts. The narrator changes from chapter to chapter, so we get to see what different characters are thinking as the events unfold, and let me tell you, it is not always pretty. Even the characters who in public seem to have their lives together have their dark secrets, and by the end of the book, there's a sliver of hope through tears at best. But I think it's an important book, and I think one of the biggest takeaways from it is how important it is to try and treat others with respect, regardless of their background or circumstances. The third book I'd like to talk about today is The Divide by Matt Taibbi. The Divide is an incredible nonfiction book that discusses how the U.S. justice system treats poor people compared to rich people, and white people compared to people of color. First of all, the amount of research that this author has put into this book is astounding. A lot of the book is devoted to exposing the atrocities committed by the big bankers, stockbrokers, hedge fund managers who crashed the economy in 2008 out of sheer greed and reckless disregard for other human beings. There are stories and emails and phone calls about how the rich elite knew exactly what they were doing and they did it anyway, and it is simultaneously fascinating and sickening. Prior to reading this book, I didn't know a great deal about what exactly Wall Street and big banks had done during the financial crisis, and now that I have read more information on the story, I'm just absolutely baffled as to how these companies basically got away with all this with nothing more than a slap on the hand. There were basically no consequences for their actions, and that gives big banks no incentive not to do it again. Then there were stories about the poor basically being harassed and assaulted in their own homes, having to go through mountains of paperwork and waiting in line for hours in order to get food stamps. There were stories about otherwise law-abiding illegal immigrants that were deported. There were stories about innocent black men who got arrested for pretty much literally no crime other than standing on the street while being black. There was one guy who was arrested at 4 in the morning because a policeman said he was standing in front of a door and blocking it. There was no one else around. It was 4 in the morning. And I mean, that guy got out of that charge, but he was still arrested, and he's considered one of the lucky ones. With all that's going on around the country these days with Michael Brown and Eric Garner and other cases like them, this book is all the more important. The level of inequality in this country between classes and races is staggering, and this book does an excellent job of exposing it. So, next up I have another fiction book. This is Maisie Dobbs by Jacqueline Wynne Spear. This was another great mystery series that I started this year. The main mystery takes place in 1930, but there are many flashbacks throughout the book telling how the main character, Maisie Dobbs, got to be where she is today, particularly flashbacks to her experience as a nurse in World War I. By 1930, with the help of her mentor, a mysterious private investigator who has tutored her for many years, she manages to establish her own private investigation agency. This was a great book. I really enjoyed particularly the relationship between Maisie and her mentor. He really gave her great advice and never underestimated her in a time period when women were generally underestimated. It's also a devastating book because you can see in the flashbacks to World War I and her reflections on them 13, 14 years later just how much of a lasting impact the war has had on her and really on all of England. I was glad the author chose to make World War I such a central aspect of this book because in all my history classes and the fiction books that I've read about a world war, they always focused on World War II, to the point where I don't really know a great deal about the First World War. This book gave me a little more insight on it than I had before, which I appreciated. I'd recommend this one if you like murder mysteries, historical fiction, or if you just want to learn a bit more about World War I. The next book I'm going to talk about today is Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg. I had heard mixed reviews about this book as well, but one day I sat down and watched her TED Talk on the same topic, and I thought, I need to read this book. I feel like 2014 was really the year of more women and men trying to help people understand what feminism is and what it isn't. Feminism is believing that men and women are equal. That's it. So Lean In is a book about women in the workplace and inequality. Not all of it will be applicable to everyone. After all, Sheryl Sandberg is an executive at a major company, and not everyone aspires to that, and that's okay. I certainly don't. But I still think the stories and statistics in this book are important in general. She talks about some blatant examples of sexism in the workplace, but also some more subtle examples. Some of you may have seen the Pantene ad recently that showed how when a man is confident, he's often described as such, but when a woman is confident, some may describe her as bossy, which can discourage women from showing that confidence. I'm not saying all women feel this way, but I feel like at least for me, it has been a factor. There's also more systemic issues that are raised, like the lack of paid maternity leave for women in the US. Overall, I think this is a really great book to pick up if you're interested in learning more about how gender inequality plays out in the workplace and how that affects our society. And the last book that I'm going to talk about today is Mountains Beyond Mountains by Tracy Kidder. This is a nonfiction book written by Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Tracy Kidder. It's essentially a biography of Dr. Paul Farmer, an American doctor who, at the time of the book at least, divided his time between his work at a hospital in Boston and his nonprofit work in Haiti and other countries around the world. Reading this book, Dr. Farmer's passion, compassion, and unending work ethic is incredible. His nonprofit organization, Partners in Health, is committed to not just healing sick people, but helping the community to prevent those people from becoming sick in the first place. Dr. Farmer's tireless efforts, narrated beautifully by Tracy Kidder, were absolutely fascinating to read. If you have any interest whatsoever in learning more about nonprofit organizations, relief work, improving medical care around the world, then you need to read this book. It makes me so glad to know that there are people and organizations like this in the world that focus on practical solutions for helping others. So, there's the first 6 of my top 12 books that I read in 2014. I will be posting the second part soon, so be on the lookout for that. In the meantime, let me know in the comments what your favorite books that you read in 2014 were, and until next time, thanks for watching!